Everyone in the mansion was terrified of the millionaire's wife. No one dared to stand up to her. Employees wept in silence as she controlled everything through manipulation and cruelty. But everything began to change the day a simple cleaning lady appeared at that house. If this beautiful story of resilience and love interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. Continuing. The mansion rose imposingly in the heart of Greenwich, Connecticut, like a fortress of light stone and immense windows that reflected the afternoon sun. Surrounded by high walls covered in perfectly trimmed ivy, the property occupied an entire block and seemed suspended in time, oblivious to the noise of the world pulsating on the other side of the wrought iron gates. Impeccable gardens, marble fountains, and a garage housing high-end imported cars composed a scene of absolute wealth. But those who knew the place up close knew that, behind the architectural beauty and evident luxury, there was something that made the air heavier and the silence more uncomfortable. Maya gripped the strap of her bag tightly as she crossed the side gate for the first time. She was 32 years old, with straight brown hair that fell to her shoulders and attentive eyes that captured every detail around her. She wore a simple, discreet uniform, like all the other female employees in the house, but she carried an invisible weight on her back that no one there could imagine. She wasn't in that mansion just to clean marble floors or organize fine china. She had a much greater purpose, a mission she had taken on after months of planning every step. And now, finally, she was inside. The housekeeper who met her at the back entrance was a woman in her 60s, thin and hunched, as if the weight of years of work had molded her body. Mrs. Gable had tired eyes and a smile that never quite reached completion. She spoke softly, almost whispering as she showed the rooms and explained the house rules. Maya noticed immediately that the woman avoided making noise, as if the simple act of walking could awaken something dangerous. Silence, impeccable cleanliness, no object out of place, no unnecessary noise. These were the first rules Mrs. Gable repeated with a choked voice. Maya listened attentively, asking discreet questions and observing every reaction from the housekeeper. There was fear in those eyes. True fear. It wasn't just the nervousness of someone afraid of losing their job. It was something deeper, as if the woman lived on the edge of an invisible abyss. As she followed through wide corridors decorated with expensive paintings and noble wood furniture, Maya felt the mansion's atmosphere envelop her like a cold mist. Everything was too perfect. Every cushion, every vase, every curtain seemed to have been positioned with millimetric precision. There was no life in that place, no human warmth. It was as if the house breathed only the controlled air of the one who commanded it. The mistress had not yet appeared. Mrs. Gable mentioned her name with reverence and caution, always lowering her tone when pronouncing Victoria. She said the lady of the house had specific routines, rigid schedules, and extremely high expectations. Any error, however small, could lead to severe consequences. Maya asked naturally if Mrs. Gable had worked there for a long time. The answer came with a heavy sigh. 15 years. 15 years serving that family, seeing employees arrive and disappear without explanation, witnessing silent changes that no one dared to question. Mrs. Gable didn't go into details, but the weight of the unspoken words hung in the air. Maya felt she was in the right place. Something wrong was happening in that house, and she was determined to find out what. The first meeting with Victoria happened the following morning. Maya was organizing the library when she heard firm footsteps descending the marble staircase. She turned discreetly and saw a woman of approximately 40 years, tall, elegant, with perfectly brushed blonde hair and a beige dress that cost more than Maya would earn in an entire year. Victoria had a beautiful face, delicate features, and a smile that could deceive anyone. But her eyes were different, cold, calculating, as if they were always evaluating, measuring, judging. She greeted Maya with exaggerated politeness, asking about her previous experience and praising the arrangement of the library. Her voice was sweet, almost maternal, but Maya noticed something disturbing. While speaking to her, Victoria kept her gaze fixed without blinking, as if she were reading every hidden thought. It was a gaze that invaded, that stripped away any attempt at protection. Maya smiled back, thanked her for the compliments, and responded with studied humility. But inside her heart raced. She was standing before the person everyone feared, and now she understood why. In the following days, Maya began to observe the house dynamics with meticulous attention. She noticed how the employees moved like shadows, avoiding crossing paths with Victoria in the hallways. She noted how the silence intensified when she entered a room. She saw how Mrs. Gable trembled when called for private conversations in the mistress's office, and she began to identify a terrifying pattern. The humiliation was constant, but never scandalous. Victoria never screamed. She didn't need to. Her weapon was the sharp word, the poisoned comment disguised as concern, the criticism that destroyed from within. A poorly positioned glass on the dining table would trigger a 15-minute lecture on incompetence and lack of respect. A rug with a tiny speck of dirt became proof of sloppiness and irresponsibility. Every error, real or invented, was used to remind the employees that they were replaceable, disposable, unworthy of trust. Maya witnessed a scene that left her chilled. Mrs. Gable had prepared a special dinner and made a mistake seasoning the meat. Victoria called all the employees to the dining room and, in front of everyone, made the housekeeper taste the dish while describing every defect with cruel detail. The humiliation lasted 10 minutes. Mrs. Gable cried in silence, apologizing repeatedly, while the other employees watched with bowed heads, relieved it wasn't them this time. But what shocked Maya most was what happened afterward. When Victoria's husband arrived home that night, she transformed completely. She smiled, hugged Edward affectionately, praised the dinner Mrs. Gable had prepared, and behaved like the perfect wife. Edward was a man in his 50s, grey-haired, with shoulders slumped from fatigue. He seemed exhausted, distant, as if he lived in a parallel world within his own home. He smiled at Victoria with gratitude, held her hand with affection, and noticed nothing of what had happened hours before. Maya understood at that moment that she was facing an actress. Victoria knew exactly how to behave in every situation, how to manipulate perceptions and construct different realities for different people. In front of her husband, she was the devoted wife. In his absence, she became the tyrant everyone feared, and the most terrifying thing was that no one inside that house had the courage to tell Edward the truth. During the night, while resting in the small room assigned to her at the back of the property, Maya reflected on what she had discovered so far. She thought about the reason that had brought her to that mansion. She thought about Edward's family, who for years had tried to get close to him without success. She thought about broken friendships, cancelled commitments, and the growing isolation of a man who was once sociable and generous. And now she understood how all of this had been built. Victoria hadn't just won Edward over. She had surrounded him, isolated him, and turned him into an emotional prisoner within his own home. And she did it with such subtlety, with such precision, that no one from the outside would ever notice. To society, Victoria was the exemplary wife. To those living under the same roof, she was the personification of fear. Maya knew she needed proof. Witnessing wasn't enough. She needed to find something concrete that revealed who Victoria truly was. And she was certain those secrets were hidden somewhere in that mansion. The next morning, while cleaning the entrance hall, Maya heard a fragile voice coming from upstairs. It was Eleanor, Edward's grandmother, an 83-year-old lady who lived in the east wing of the house. Maya had heard of her but hadn't met her in person yet. Mrs. Gable had mentioned that the elderly woman was in frail health and spent most of her time in her room. Curious, Maya climbed the stairs silently and found Eleanor sitting in an armchair near the window, looking at the gardens with a distant expression. The lady had white hair pulled back in a bun, deep wrinkles that told stories of a long life, and eyes that, despite her age, still shone with lucidity. When she noticed Maya's presence, Eleanor smiled kindly and gestured for her to approach. They spoke briefly. The elderly woman asked about the new employee, commented on the weather, and praised the gardens she could see from the window. But then suddenly her expression changed. She became serious, almost frightened, and gripped Maya's hand with surprising strength. "Be careful with her," the lady whispered. Eleanor didn't mention names, but Maya understood perfectly. Edward's grandmother knew something. She had seen something, and she was trying to warn her. Before she could ask more, they heard footsteps approaching. Victoria appeared at the bedroom door with a polite smile and a tray of medications. She greeted Maya with false cordiality and asked her to return to her duties. As she descended the stairs, Maya looked back and saw Victoria handing several pills to Eleanor, who accepted them with resignation. That night Maya couldn't sleep. Lying on the narrow bed in the back room, She heard the distant sounds of the mansion, the creak of a door, footsteps muffled by the carpet, the wind hitting the windows. She thought of Eleanor, that frightened look, and the whispered warning. She thought of Mrs. Gable, bowed by the weight of 15 years of silent humiliations. She thought of Edward, a man who seemed to live like a ghost in his own home, isolated from everything and everyone he once loved, and she wondered how much longer she could sustain this charade. How long could she pretend to be just another frightened cleaning lady, head down, waiting for orders and avoiding trouble? How long until Victoria began to suspect, to investigate, to discover the cracks in the story Maya had constructed to enter that house? She got out of bed and walked to the small window overlooking the back gardens. The moon illuminated the perfectly pruned trees, the flowers organized in geometric beds, the stone path leading to the indoor pool. All so beautiful, all so perfect, all so false. Maya leaned her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. She remembered the day she received the phone call that changed everything. It was Edward's sister, a desperate woman who hadn't seen her brother in almost 3 years. She told her with a choked voice how Edward had gradually drifted away from the family, cancelling lunches, ignoring birthdays, making increasingly flimsy excuses. At first, everyone thought it was just work stress or adapting to marriage. But over time, they realized something was very wrong. Edward's calls became rarer and more controlled. When he did answer, he sounded tired, distant, as if reading a rehearsed script. He always spoke well of Victoria, praised her dedication, thanked her for her care. But he never asked about the family. He never showed interest in seeing them. It was as if he had been erased from the inside, turned into a hollow version of himself. The family tried everything. They visited the mansion, but Victoria always received them with excessive politeness and found reasons to cut the visits short. Edward was tired, had important meetings, wasn't feeling well. There was always an excuse, and when they finally managed to speak to him alone for a few minutes, they noticed how much he had changed. The slumped shoulders, the dull gaze, the monotonous voice. It was as if he were living in a permanent state of exhaustion. That was when Edward's sister decided to hire someone to investigate. She needed to understand what was happening inside that mansion. She needed proof to show her brother he was being manipulated. And Maya, with her discreet experience and ability to go unnoticed, was the person chosen for this mission. Maya opened her eyes and looked back at the moonlit gardens. She knew she had accepted this job not just for the money, but because Edward's story echoed something in her own life. She too knew the feeling of being trapped in an invisible web. She too knew what it was like to live under the control of someone who used words as weapons and turned affection into chains. And she had her own carefully guarded secrets. Secrets that no one in that house could discover. Because if Victoria found out who Maya really was, if she unraveled the layers of lies that brought her there, the silent war that had begun in that mansion would turn into something much more dangerous. Maya touched her hair with her fingers, feeling the familiar texture under her fingertips. No one there knew those strands weren't hers. No one imagined what she hid beneath that ordinary appearance. And as long as that secret remained protected, she would have a chance to fulfill her mission. She went back to bed and pulled the blanket to her chin. Tomorrow would be another day of observation, another day of pretending, another day moving through the shadows of that luxury mansion. She needed to be patient. She needed to be careful, because she knew Victoria wasn't just cruel. She was intelligent, calculating, and dangerous. And Maya was absolutely certain that somewhere in that house there were secrets much larger than anyone could imagine. Secrets that would explain not only what was happening to Edward, but perhaps reveal a much darker pattern. For now she had to remain invisible, observing every movement, listening to every conversation, gathering every fragment of truth hidden between those walls covered in expensive paintings and Persian rugs. Because Maya wasn't just a temporary employee. She wasn't just a hired investigator. She was someone who perfectly understood what it meant to live in fear, someone who knew the pain of carrying heavy secrets, someone who knew exactly what it was like to feel small before an invisible power. And this deep understanding, this empathy born from painful experiences, was exactly what made her the right person to face Victoria. Because to defeat a predator, sometimes you need to know the feeling of being hunted. Maya closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing the coming days would bring disturbing revelations. She knew she was entering dangerous territory, where every step had to be calculated and every word weighed with care. But she wouldn't back down. She couldn't. Because now that she had seen the fear in Mrs. Gable's eyes, heard Eleanor's desperate warning and felt Edward's deep loneliness, she felt responsible for all of them. And she wouldn't leave that mansion until she managed to free every person trapped in that web of manipulation, even if it meant exposing her own secrets, even if it meant facing her own fears. Because sometimes, Maya thought before finally falling asleep, the only way to save others is to first find the courage to save yourself. The following days brought revelations Maya didn't expect to find so soon. The mansion's routine followed a rigid and predictable pattern, but it was precisely in the small deviations, the calculated exceptions, that Victoria's true nature revealed itself with disturbing clarity. Maya quickly learned that Thursday was the day Edward went out for meetings at the office and only returned late in the afternoon. It was on these days that Victoria would completely let go, without needing to maintain the mask of a dedicated wife. And it was on a rainy Thursday in May that Maya witnessed something that made her understand the real dimension of the control exercised in that house. The cook, a woman named Jean who had worked there for 8 years, had prepared breakfast with the same care as always. Everything was impeccable. The fruit cut into delicate shapes, the warm bread, the freshly squeezed juice. But when Victoria came down for breakfast, she picked up a piece of toast, examined it for a few seconds, and simply threw it in the trash. Then she looked at Jean with that cold smile Maya had already learned to recognize. "It's burnt," Victoria said in a calm voice. Jean tried to explain that she had toasted it to the exact point the mistress always requested, but she was interrupted with a wave of the hand. Victoria didn't want explanations. She wanted submission. And she spent the next 10 minutes describing, in painful detail, how Jean was getting old, slow and careless, how perhaps it was time to hire someone younger, more attentive, more competent. Maya watched everything from the next room, pretending to tidy the bookshelves. She saw the silent tears streaming down Jean's face. She saw how the cook bowed even further, apologizing repeatedly, promising to do better. And she saw, with terrifying clarity, how Victoria seemed to feed off that pain as if others' humiliation gave her energy. When Jean went back to the kitchen, shattered, Victoria simply took another piece of toast, ate peacefully, and went on with her day. As if nothing had happened, as if destroying someone emotionally was just another morning task. Maya felt anger rise in her throat, but she controlled herself. She couldn't react. She couldn't expose herself. Not yet. She needed to fully understand the system before trying to dismantle it. And the more she observed, the more she realized Victoria didn't act on impulse. Every attack was calculated. Every humiliation had a specific purpose. That afternoon, while cleaning Edward's office, Maya found something interesting. Old photographs kept in a rarely used drawer. They were images from a different time, when Edward still smiled with his eyes, when he had friends around him, when he seemed truly alive. There were photos of him with family, at parties, on trips, and in none of them did Victoria appear. Maya picked up a specific photograph that caught her attention. Edward was standing next to a man of the same age, both smiling broadly, with their arms over each other's shoulders. On the back was written, "Richard and I, Martha's Vineyard, 2015 Mo." The handwriting was Edward's, relaxed and happy. Maya mentally stored that name. Richard, a close friend who apparently was no longer part of Edward's life. She continued investigating discreetly. She found an old planner from 2 years ago, full of social engagements, dinners, business meetings. Edward's handwriting filled the pages with enthusiasm. But then, gradually, the commitments began to be crossed out. Cancellations, followed by excuses noted in the margins. Headache. Victoria isn't well. Need to stay home. Too tired. And then, in the last third of the planner, the pages were practically empty. It was as if Edward's social life had been completely erased. Maya closed the drawer carefully and felt a tightness in her chest. She was seeing, documented on paper, the process of a man's isolation. Later that day, while organizing clothes in the couple's walk-in closet, Maya heard voices coming from the bedroom. Victoria was on the phone, and by the tone of her voice, she didn't expect to be heard. Maya stood frozen behind the half-open door, holding her breath. "He doesn't even notice," Victoria was saying with a low laugh. "He thinks it was his idea, that he chose to drift away. Poor Edward. So smart for business, so naive for everything else." The voice on the other end was inaudible, but Victoria continued, "Don't worry. I know exactly what I'm doing. Every person he loved was pushed away with care. Every friendship was poisoned bit by bit, and he believes everyone abandoned him, that only I am left." Maya felt her heart race. She was hearing a confession, a clear, cold admission of systematic manipulation. She wanted to record it, wanted to witness it, but knew she couldn't. Any movement would be detected, so she remained motionless, listening to every word with absolute attention. Victoria ended the call and left the room. Maya waited a few minutes before moving, breathing deeply to calm her nerves. Now she was certain Edward hadn't moved away from his family by choice. He had been deliberately isolated. And Victoria didn't just allow it, she orchestrated it all. That night, Maya sought out Eleanor. She knew the elderly woman had important information, but she needed to find her at a time when Victoria wasn't around. She found the opportunity when the mistress went out for a charity event in Manhattan. She went up to Eleanor's room and knocked softly. The lady received her with a tired smile and gestured for her to enter. The room was comfortable, decorated with antique furniture and family photographs. Maya recognized Edward in several of them, always smiling, always surrounded by people. They sat together near the window. Eleanor held Maya's hand and looked her in the eyes with surprising intensity. "I know you're not just a cleaning lady," the lady said in a weak but firm voice. "I can see it. You're looking for something. You're trying to understand." Maya didn't deny it. She nodded slowly and asked if Eleanor could tell her what she knew. The lady closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength to speak about something painful. "When Victoria arrived in our lives 4 years ago, Edward was vulnerable," Eleanor began. "He had just lost a major work contract. He was discouraged, needing support. She appeared like an angel, beautiful, attentive, interested. She won Edward over in a few weeks, and we, naive as we were, thought it was true love." The lady opened her eyes and looked at the photographs on the wall. "But I soon realized something was wrong. Small things. She always found reasons for Edward not to visit the family. She always had headaches when we scheduled dinners. She always invented commitments when we planned trips together. And Edward, in love and blind, accepted it all." Eleanor told how Victoria began planting seeds of distrust, subtle comments about family members, insinuations about the intentions of Edward's friends, suggestions that everyone only wanted his money, his influence. And Edward, weakened and manipulated, began to believe it. "I tried to warn him," the lady continued with a choked voice, "but Victoria is very smart. She turned my concern into jealousy. She made Edward believe I didn't accept the marriage because I wanted to control him. And when I insisted, she suggested I was getting confused, that age was making me paranoid." Maya held the lady's hand tightly. She asked about the medication she saw Victoria give Eleanor every day. The lady sighed deeply. "There are many, more than the doctor prescribed. Whenever I question it, she says it's a new directive, that she spoke to the doctors, but I feel more and more confused, more tired. Sometimes I have trouble remembering things, and when I try to tell Edward something important, it feels like the words don't come out right." Maya felt the anger grow again. Victoria wasn't just isolating Edward, she was neutralizing the only person in the house who could reveal the truth. She was using medication to confuse Eleanor, to make her an unreliable witness. She asked if the lady remembered anything specific Victoria had done or said. Eleanor thought for a moment, and then her eyes widened as if a forgotten memory had resurfaced. "One night, a few months ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and heard voices coming from the kitchen. I went down slowly and saw Victoria mixing something. When she noticed my presence, she quickly hid it and smiled. She said she was preparing a tea for Edward, that he was having trouble sleeping. But the expression on her face, and Maya, I've never seen anyone look that way. She seemed happy while preparing something for him." Maya felt a chill down her spine. She asked if Edward had taken that tea. Eleanor nodded, explaining that the next day he was especially tired, confused, unable to concentrate on important meetings. It was the first time he cancelled work commitments, the lady remembered, and after that it happened more often. Whenever Victoria prepared those special teas, Edward would be exhausted for days. and she told everyone he was stressed, that he needed to rest, that he shouldn't be disturbed. Maya needed proof. She needed something concrete that linked Victoria to deeper manipulation, and she knew that proof was hidden somewhere in the mansion. She thanked Eleanor and promised she would do everything in her power to help. The lady gripped her hand tightly and whispered one last warning. Be careful, Maya. She is dangerous in a way you don't fully understand yet. She's not just cruel. She's patient, meticulous. And when she finds out someone is against her, she doesn't react with anger. She reacts with a plan, and her plans are always devastating. Maya returned to her room with her mind racing. She knew she needed to act quickly, but with extreme caution. Victoria was already suspicious enough. Any false step could destroy the entire investigation. She lay in bed and thought about everything she had discovered. Edward's systematic isolation, Eleanor's neutralization, the mysterious tease, and that phone conversation where Victoria admitted, with terrifying coldness, to manipulating everything. But something still didn't fit. Why? Why did Victoria do all this? Was it just for money, for power? Or was there something deeper, more disturbing, motivating that meticulous cruelty? Maya was sure the answer was stored somewhere, and she was determined to find it, even if it meant entering increasingly dangerous territory, even if it meant putting herself directly in the path of a woman who, as Eleanor had warned, was much more dangerous than anyone could imagine. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow she would continue investigating. Tomorrow she would look for that definitive proof, because now she wasn't doing this just for Edward's sister or the distant family. She was doing it for Mrs. Gable, for Jean, for Eleanor, and for everyone living trapped in that web. And mainly, she was doing it for Edward, a man who had been slowly destroyed day after day by someone who was supposed to love him, a man who desperately needed to wake up to reality before it was too late. Maya fell asleep with renewed determination. She knew the coming days would bring greater risks. She knew she was entering a dangerous game against a ruthless adversary. But something had changed inside her since she arrived at that mansion. She was no longer just an investigator doing a job. She had become a witness to something much larger, much more disturbing. And every story she heard, every tear she saw, every moment of humiliation she witnessed, fed a determination that went beyond professional duty. She thought of all the people she had met throughout her life. People who lived for years in destructive relationships, trapped by fear, shame, or emotional dependence. People who lost themselves bit by bit, day after day, until they became shadows of what they once were. And she thought of herself, of the times she also felt small, invisible, unworthy, of the scars she carried hidden under an ordinary appearance, of the moments when fear almost paralyzed her completely. But she wouldn't back down. She couldn't, because now that she had seen the truth, she could no longer pretend she didn't know. And as long as there was a chance to free those people, she would keep fighting. She would keep investigating. She would keep gathering every fragment of proof until she had enough to bring down that empire of lies, even if it meant facing her own fears, even if it meant exposing her own secrets, because Maya knew deep in her heart that this battle wasn't just about Edward or his family. It was about all the silent victims of people like Victoria. It was about all the times fear defeated courage. It was about all the truths hidden behind false smiles and luxury mansions. It was about every person who ever had to choose between the safety of a lie and the risk of the truth. And Maya, lying on that narrow bed in the back room of a mansion, where fear ruled like an invisible ghost, made her choice. She chose the truth. She chose the fight. She chose to believe that, even against an adversary as powerful and cruel as Victoria, there was still hope. And Maya was ready to bring those truths to light, whatever the cost. The opportunity arose on Tuesday morning. Victoria went out for a charity lunch in the Upper East Side, and according to Mrs. Gable, usually took at least 4 hours at these events. Edward was in a meeting downtown. The mansion was silent, with only the staff moving discreetly through the rooms. Maya knew this was the moment. She climbed the stairs, trying to control the nervousness that made her heart beat fast. Every step on the soft carpet seemed to echo in her ears. She reached the door of the master bedroom and looked around before turning the gold handle. The bedroom was immense and luxurious. A king-size bed dominated the center, covered in beige silk sheets. There was a walk-in closet larger than Maya's room, with clothes organized by color and season. The windows overlooked the front gardens, and the morning light entered softly through linen curtains. Maya started with Victoria's desk. She opened drawers carefully, examining documents, business cards, recent planners. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Social correspondence, invitations to events, notes about appointments. Nothing that revealed the true nature of the lady of the house. Then she moved to the closet. She searched through the expensive clothes, checked the high shelves, examined boxes of imported shoes. She was starting to lose hope when she noticed something strange. In the back of the closet, behind a row of evening gowns, there was a small discreet door almost invisible in the wood-paneled wall. Maya pulled the dresses aside and examined the door. It had no lock, just a simple latch. She took a deep breath and opened it slowly, expecting to find a safe or important documents. What she saw left her frozen. It was a small space, almost a secret cupboard, and inside it, organized with obsessive care, were stacked shoeboxes, but Maya knew by instinct that they didn't contain shoes. She took the first box with trembling hands and opened it. Photographs, dozens of them, but they weren't ordinary photos of family or trips. They were images of people in moments of complete vulnerability, men crying, women with expressions of despair, faces destroyed by emotional pain. And in each photograph, captured with cruel precision, was the exact moment that person broke. Maya flipped through the images with growing horror. She recognized some faces from business magazines and social events, successful entrepreneurs, public figures, people who seemed to have perfect lives, but there they were, recorded in their worst moments, humiliated, defeated, destroyed. And on the back of each photograph, in neat handwriting, were notes, dates, names, and small comments that made Maya's stomach turn. Mark, September 2018, took 6 months. Cried like a child when he found out the company was bankrupt. Delicious. Patricia, March 2019, 4 months, lost custody of the children. The expression on her face was my greatest achievement so far. Maya gripped the edge of the shelf to keep from staggering. She was standing before an archive of destruction, a meticulous record of ruined lives, and the handwriting was Victoria's. Every word, every sadistic comment, every celebration of others' suffering, all written with the same elegance she used to write party invitations. She picked up another box. More photographs, more victims. And then she found something even more disturbing. A leather-bound notebook with the initials VW engraved in gold on the cover. She opened it with trembling hands. It was a diary. But not an ordinary diary. It was a manual of manipulation, a detailed guide on how Victoria chose, studied, and destroyed her victims. The first page had a date from 8 years ago. Maya began to read and felt nausea rise in her throat. "Everyone has a weak point," Victoria wrote in perfect calligraphy. "The key is to find it. For some it's money. For others it's self-esteem. For many it's fear of abandonment or rejection. The secret is to observe, study, understand what keeps that person functioning, and then slowly destroy exactly that." Maya continued reading, page after page. Victoria described her victims with clinical coldness, how she had identified vulnerabilities, created dependency situations, planted doubts, and isolated each person from their support systems. It was a methodical process, calculated and completely devoid of empathy. She found an entire section dedicated to Edward. Maya's heart raced as she read. Edward Miller, successful businessman but emotionally fragile after the failure of the Horizon project, lost a lot of money and confidence. He is vulnerable. Perfect. The following pages documented month by month how Victoria had won Edward over, not out of love, out of strategy. Every meeting planned, every word calculated, every gesture of affection was a piece on a chessboard. Phase 1 complete. Trust established. He believes I'm the only person who truly understands him. Next step, isolation. Maya read with growing horror how Victoria described her methods, how she planted seeds of distrust about Edward's family, how she created situations where his friends seemed selfish or opportunistic, how she invented illnesses and emotional crises at times when Edward planned social commitments. And it worked perfectly, Victoria wrote. In 2 years, Edward broke with everyone. The family thinks he abandoned them. His friends believe he's changed, but the truth is I simply removed all other influences. Now he has only me. He depends only on me, and that gives me absolute power. Maya had to stop reading for a moment. She breathed deeply, trying to control the anger burning in her chest. That wasn't love. It wasn't even obsession. It was pure sadism. Victoria didn't love Edward. She had chosen him as a target, as an experiment, as another victim in her macabre collection. She kept flipping through the diary and found something that made her stop completely. A section marked with a red post-it. The title of the page was Special Cases, and there, described in disturbing detail, was the account of a tragedy that had happened in Edward's family 3 years earlier. David Miller, Edward's cousin, promising entrepreneur, married to Fiona, had everything. Until he met me. Maya vaguely remembered hearing Edward's sister mention a cousin who had gone through difficult times years ago, but she never knew the details. And now, reading Victoria's words, she understood why. David was my most ambitious project yet, Victoria wrote. It took almost a whole year. But I did it. I destroyed his marriage, his business, his reputation. And the best part was that no one ever knew it was me. Everyone believed he simply collapsed, that he couldn't handle the pressure. Maya felt tears sting her eyes. Victoria hadn't just destroyed Edward. She had already destroyed another person from the same family before, and no one had noticed. No one had connected the dots. Until now. She continued reading, discovering how Victoria had approached David years ago using another identity, creating situations that led him to make disastrous business decisions, how she had planted false evidence that destroyed his marriage, how she had orchestrated his social fall, and when she finished with David, she simply disappeared from his life and resurfaced years later as Edward's savior. No one made the connection. The families never spoke much, and Victoria used different names at different times. Maya closed the diary, her hands shaking. She was holding in her hands definitive proof that Victoria wasn't just a cruel wife. She was a systematic predator, someone who chose victims, studied their vulnerabilities, and destroyed them methodically. And she did it not out of necessity or financial gain. She did it for pleasure, for power, for the sadistic satisfaction of breaking lives. She needed to photograph everything. She took her phone and started taking photos of every important page of the diary, of every disturbing photograph. But she was so focused that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching in the hallway. The bedroom door opened. Maya froze. She turned slowly and saw Victoria standing in the entrance, with a shopping bag in her hand and a cold smile on her lips. The silence that settled between them was dense, charged with danger. "Looking for something specific, Maya?" Victoria's voice was calm, almost polite, but her eyes had that predatory glint Maya had learned to recognize. She tried to think of an excuse, but knew it was useless. She was holding the diary in her hands. The photographs were scattered around. There was no denying it. No pretending. Victoria entered the room with slow, deliberate steps. She placed the bag on the bed without taking her eyes off Maya. Then she crossed her arms and tilted her head, as if studying an interesting insect. "You know, I was starting to suspect you," Victoria said. "Too observant, too attentive, too brave in defending Mrs. Gable that day. Not typical behavior for a simple cleaning lady." Maya gripped the diary tightly. She knew she was in danger. She knew Victoria wouldn't hesitate to destroy her, as she had destroyed so many others. But a part of her, the part that had decided to fight no matter the cost, refused to show fear. "Who sent you here?" Victoria's question cut the silence. "Edward's family. They never give up, do they? Always trying to get me out of the way. As if they were saints, as if they truly cared about him." Maya didn't answer. She just watched, calculating her options. The door was blocked by Victoria. The windows led to the second floor. There was no easy exit. Victoria took another step forward. "You must be feeling very brave right now. You think you've discovered my big secret. You think you're going to save poor Edward. But let me tell you something you still haven't understood." She stopped a few inches from Maya. Even without raising her voice, her presence was intimidating. "Edward doesn't want to be saved. He is exactly where he wants to be by my side, depending on me, because I gave him something no one else could, total acceptance. unconditional love, or at least that's what he believes. Maya finally found her voice. You don't love him. That isn't love. It's control. It's manipulation. It's cruelty disguised as care. Victoria smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. And who are you to judge? An undercover spy in my house. Someone who lies every day about who they really are. At least I'm honest about my intentions. With Edward? No. But with myself? Always. She snatched the diary from Maya's hands with a quick movement. You must be thinking of going to Edward now, showing him the diary, revealing everything. But let me ask you a question. Do you really think he'll believe you? An employee he's known for 2 weeks, against me, the wife who has been by his side for 4 years? Maya felt a chill down her spine, because she knew Victoria was right. Edward was so conditioned, so manipulated, that he would likely reject any evidence that contradicted the image he had of Victoria. Do you know what I'm going to do? Victoria put the diary back in its hiding place. I'm not going to kick you out. I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to make a scene. I'm going to let you stay, because destroying you will be much more interesting if it's done slowly, and I already know exactly how. She moved even closer, completely invading Maya's personal space. I found out a few things about you while I was out. I made some calls, talked to the right people, and do you know what I found? Maya's heart raced. You aren't who you say you are, Victoria continued with that cruel smile, and you have secrets of your own, secrets you would do anything to keep hidden. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to keep working in this house, you're going to keep pretending, and if you try to reveal anything about me to Edward or anyone else, I will reveal everything about you, every detail, every lie, every shame you carry. Maya tried not to show the panic she felt growing. How could Victoria have found out? What exactly did she know? Victoria stepped away and walked to the door. Welcome to the game, Maya, or should I call you by your real name? She left the question hanging in the air and walked out of the room, leaving Maya alone with the crushing realization that she had completely underestimated her adversary. The war had begun, and Victoria had just shown she knew how to play much better than Maya imagined. The days that followed were the tensest Maya had ever lived. Victoria did nothing explicit. She didn't confront her publicly. She didn't reveal her discoveries. But the threat hung in the air like a heavy cloud, present in every look exchanged, in every casual encounter in the mansion's corridors. Maya continued working, trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy, but she felt Victoria's eyes on her constantly, observing, studying, planning. And then the subtle provocations began. On Thursday morning, while Maya was tidying the living room, Victoria entered with a beauty magazine in her hands. She sat on the sofa with studied elegance and began flipping through the pages, commenting aloud. Look at these new hair treatments, she said, as if talking to herself. It's impressive how aesthetic medicine has evolved. Nowadays anyone can have perfect hair, even those born with problems, even those who went through trauma. Her voice had a casual tone, but Maya felt the intentional sting in the words. She stopped fluffing the cushions and looked at Victoria. The mistress smiled sweetly and continued. I knew a woman once who had a rare condition. She lost all her hair as a child. She wore wigs so perfect that no one ever suspected. But imagine the weight of carrying that secret every day, the constant fear of being discovered. Maya felt her blood freeze in her veins. Victoria knew. Somehow she had discovered her deepest secret, the scar she had carried since she was 8 years old, when a terrible accident left her without the hair that never grew back, the shame that followed her like a shadow, the humiliation she had suffered at school when cruel classmates pulled off her scarf in front of everyone and turned her pain into a spectacle, the trauma that had molded who she was, that had taught her to hide, to build layers of protection, to never fully trust anyone. She remembered the difficult years, the nights crying in the bathroom, the mirror she avoided looking at, the constant questions from strangers, the well-intentioned but painful offers of miracle treatments, and finally, at 13, when she got her first quality wig and felt, for the first time in years, that maybe she could blend in, that maybe she could just be another ordinary person in the crowd. But the fear had never completely left her. The fear of being discovered, the fear of someone pulling her hair and revealing the truth, the fear of intimacy, of closeness, of any situation where her secret could be exposed. This fear had shaped her life choices, her relationships, her career. And now, Victoria had found exactly that wound and was prepared to tear it open in front of the whole world. Victoria closed the magazine and looked directly at Maya. It must be terrible to live in fear that someone will discover who you really are, or rather, what you're really hiding. She got up and left the room, leaving Maya with her legs trembling and her heart racing. From that day on, the provocations intensified. Victoria began making comments about hair during dinner, always when Maya was nearby serving. She spoke about the importance of appearance, about how people judged by physical details. She mentioned cases of public exposure, of secrets revealed in embarrassing moments. Every word was a calculated stab. Maya knew Victoria was playing with her like a cat plays with a mouse before devouring it. And the worst thing was not being able to react, not being able to scream, not being able to accuse. Because doing so would be admitting that the provocations were working. It would be giving Victoria total power. One night, while organizing Victoria's closet as part of her duties, Maya found a new box, different from the others. Upon opening it, she saw it was full of photographs of herself, images taken secretly during her activities in the mansion. And among the photos there was a printed page, an old medical document. Her document, detailing her scalp condition, detailing the accident that had changed her life. Maya's hands shook, holding that paper. Victoria didn't just know, she had proof, she had documentation, and she was making sure to show that she could destroy her at any moment. The next morning, Victoria called Maya for a private conversation in the office. Edward had gone out for a meeting, and the house was silent. Maya entered the room feeling as if she were walking into a trap. Victoria was sitting behind the mahogany desk, her hands interlaced and that cold smile Maya had learned to fear on her face. "Sit down," she said, pointing to the chair in front of her. Maya obeyed, keeping her posture upright despite the fear she felt. "Let's talk like two intelligent women," Victoria began. "You know what I have on you. I know what you've discovered about me. We're at an interesting impasse, but here is the fundamental difference between us. I have nothing to lose. My life, my marriage, my social position, everything is secure. But you," Maya felt the weight of her name in Victoria's mouth. "You have everything to lose." She leaned forward, her eyes fixed. "If you try to expose my diary, I simply deny it. Edward will never believe you. He'll think it's an invention, manipulation by his family to separate us, and then I reveal who you really are. I tell everyone about your lies, about how you infiltrated my house with a false identity, and as a final touch, I expose your most intimate secret in front of everyone." Maya clenched her fists, struggling not to show the terror she felt. "Imagine the scene," Victoria continued with evident pleasure. "A party, important people, photographers, and suddenly, in front of everyone, your secret is revealed. The thing you've hidden your whole life, the thing that makes you feel less, the thing that made you suffer from bullying at school, all exposed, all turned into a spectacle." She stood up and walked to the window. "I have connections, Maya. I can make your life a living hell. I can ensure that every time you look for a job, people know who you are. I can turn your existence into a perpetual public shame. Or," she turned with a smile, "you can simply leave. Give up this ridiculous investigation. Leave Edward and me in peace, and your secret dies with me." Maya finally found her voice, even if it was shaky. "And the other victims? The people you destroyed? David? Everyone recorded in your diary?" Victoria shrugged. "Choices they made, weaknesses they had. I just exposed them, just showed who they really were when the pressure increased. I'm not responsible for others' fragility." Maya felt nauseous. She was facing someone completely devoid of empathy, someone who saw people as objects, as challenges, as disposable toys. "You have 24 hours to decide," Victoria said, returning to behind the desk. "Either you go away in silence, or I begin building your public destruction. And believe me, it will be meticulous. It will be devastating. It will be something you will never forget." Maya left the office with shaky legs. She locked herself in her room and, for the first time since she arrived at that mansion, allowed herself to cry. Not just out of fear, but from the frustration of being so close to the truth and yet so powerless. She thought of all Victoria's victims, of David, who probably never knew why his life fell apart, of Edward, who lived a lie thinking he was loved, of Eleanor, being over-medicated so she couldn't testify, of all the employees who trembled in fear every day, and she thought of herself, of the 8-year-old girl who woke up in the hospital after the accident and discovered she would never have hair again, of the cruel laughter of schoolmates, of the tears shed in front of the mirror, of the day when at 13 she got her first wig and felt she could be normal again. But she also remembered the day she decided she wouldn't let that define her, that she wouldn't let shame win, that she would find ways to live despite the constant fear of exposure. And now, 20 years later, she was back in that same place, confronting the fear of being seen, of being judged, of being publicly humiliated. Maya dried her tears and took a deep breath. She had a choice to make, and she knew that no matter what she decided, nothing would ever be the same. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, weighing her options. She could give up, leave, protect her secret, and try to forget everything she had discovered. It would be the safest choice, the choice that protected her own peace. But then she thought of Edward, of the way he hunched over when Victoria was nearby, of the dull light in his eyes, of the life that had been stolen from him bit by bit, day after day without him noticing, and she thought of all the people Victoria would destroy in the future. Because women like her don't stop. They don't feel remorse. They just keep hunting, destroying, collecting victims like trophies. Dawn broke without Maya having reached a decision. She got up tired and began her usual routine. But all day, she felt the weight of the ultimatum on her shoulders. Victoria watched her from afar. She said nothing, she just smiled. That smile that said she already knew what Maya's choice would be, that she had already won. That fear always wins. It was during dinner that something changed. Maya was serving the table when she heard Edward mention an old friend. Richard, the same one who appeared in that old photograph. Edward commented with a melancholy voice that he missed the old days, that sometimes he thought of calling Richard. Victoria immediately intervened with her sweet and poisonous voice. But darling, you know Richard let you down. Remember when he didn't show up for your birthday, when he spoke ill of you to other businessmen? Some friendships aren't worth keeping. Maya saw Edward's expression change, the seed of doubt planted, the memory distorted, and she realized she was witnessing in real time the manipulation happening. Victoria didn't even blink while she rewrote reality in her husband's mind. It was at that moment that Maya made her decision. She wasn't going away. She wouldn't give up. Because if she backed down now, Victoria would continue destroying lives. She would continue isolating, manipulating, breaking people, and Maya would be an accomplice through a mission. She knew what that meant. It meant Victoria would carry out her threats. It meant her secret would be exposed. It meant facing exactly what she had feared most since childhood. But it also meant giving Edward a chance, giving a voice to all the silent victims, preventing more people from suffering at the hands of that predator. That night, Maya sought out Mrs. Gable. She told her everything. She showed the photos she had taken of the diary before being caught. She explained who Victoria really was, and she asked for help. Mrs. Gable, with tears in her eyes, agreed. 15 years of humiliations had created in her a silent rage that finally found a channel. She knew other former employees, people who had worked for Victoria in previous jobs, people who had stories to tell, people who had been fired without explanation, people who still carried the emotional scars of having worked under her command. Together, they began gathering testimonies. They began connecting the dots that Victoria had scattered over years, trying to erase tracks, building different identities for each phase of her predatory life. They began building a case that couldn't be denied, a pattern so clear, so meticulous, that it would be impossible to dismiss as coincidence or misinterpretation. Maya knew Victoria would soon find out. She knew the retaliation would be brutal, but she had decided that some battles needed to be fought, even when the personal cost was devastating, even when it meant exposing exactly what she feared most in the world. Because sometimes, Maya thought as she worked late into the night gathering evidence, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite it. It's choosing to protect others, even when it means exposing yourself. And Maya had made her choice. She wouldn't back down anymore, no matter what Victoria did, no matter how public or humiliating the exposure was. War was declared, and this time Maya would fight to the end. The news of the party arrived 3 days later. Victoria announced during breakfast that she would host a grand event at the mansion, a celebration in honor of her 4-year marriage to Edward. She would invite business leaders, journalists, influential figures from high society. It would be a memorable night, she said with that smile Maya had learned to decipher. Memorable for all the wrong reasons. Maya knew that party wasn't a celebration. It was a trap. Victoria had decided that the time for subtle games was over, and she had chosen the perfect stage for the public destruction she had promised. Preparations began immediately. Decorators invaded the mansion daily, transforming every room into a scene of exaggerated luxury. Flowers were imported, elaborate arrangements that cost more than the monthly salary of any employee. A renowned catering company was hired, famous for serving celebrity weddings and billion-dollar corporate events. Everything had to be impeccable. Everything had to impress. Everything had to demonstrate Victoria's power and absolute control over that universe. The guest list was carefully selected. They weren't just friends or acquaintances. They were witnesses, influential people who would spread any occurrence of that night throughout society. Social columnists, photographers from major magazines, businessmen who did business with Edward. Each invitation was a piece on Victoria's board. Because the party wasn't just about the marriage, it was about power. It was about showing absolute control. It was about creating the perfect stage for the destruction she had promised. While the mansion transformed into a luxurious stage, Maya and Mrs. Gable worked in the shadows. They managed to contact 3 of Victoria's former employees. Each had similar stories: constant humiliations, sudden dismissals without explanation, and the persistent feeling that something was deeply wrong in that house. One of the testimonies was particularly revealing. A former governess named Lillian, who had worked for Victoria before she married Edward. Lillian told how Victoria used to create impossible situations just to have an excuse to punish the staff, how she invented lost objects and accused the maids of theft, how she liked to see people begging for their jobs, crying, humiliating themselves, and she always had that notebook, Lillian told with a trembling voice. She wrote things down about all of us, our fears, our weaknesses, our secrets. Once I heard her saying on the phone that every person was a puzzle, and she loved finding exactly where to press to make everything fall apart. Maya recorded every testimony. She organized the photographs of the diary she had obtained. She gathered documents showing the pattern of manipulation over the years, and she realized she had enough material to, at the very least, plant serious doubts about who Victoria truly was. But Victoria didn't stay still. 2 days before the party, Jean was fired, without prior notice, without clear justification. She was simply called to the office and informed that her services were no longer needed. The cook left the mansion in tears, carrying a box with her personal belongings. Maya understood the message. Victoria was eliminating witnesses. Anyone who could confirm her behavior inside the house was being systematically removed. That same night, Maya sought out Eleanor. She needed to ensure the lady was protected. She found her more confused than ever. Victoria had increased the dosage of medications even further, claiming new medical directives. Eleanor could barely form complete sentences. Her eyes were glazed, her speech slurred. Maya felt rage burn in her chest. She held the lady's hand and promised that everything would change soon, that Victoria wouldn't be able to keep doing this. Eleanor tried to smile, but she was just a shadow of the lucid woman Maya had met weeks ago. On the day before the party, while supervising the decoration, Victoria called Maya for a talk. They walked to the garden, far from the ears of the decorators and vendors. "Tomorrow will be a special day," Victoria began in a soft voice. "Important people will be here, photographers, journalists. Everything will be recorded. Everything will be remembered." She stopped in front of a marble fountain and looked at Maya. "You still have time to make the right choice. You can leave now. You can disappear from this house and this city, and I'll forget everything I found out about you." Maya kept her expression neutral. "And if I stay?" Victoria smiled. "If you stay tomorrow night in front of all the guests, I'm going to reveal that you're an imposter. I'm going to tell them you infiltrated my house with a false identity. And then, as a grand finale, I'm going to show everyone who you really are. What you're really hiding." She approached Maya until they were face to face. "And believe me, Maya, I'm going to make it an unforgettable show. I'm going to ensure you feel exactly as you felt when you were 8 years old. when those cruel children pulled off your scarf in front of the whole school. Maya felt her stomach turn. Victoria had investigated everything. She knew every detail of her trauma, and she was prepared to recreate it, amplify it, turn it into public entertainment. "Last chance," Victoria said, stepping away. "Go away or face the consequences." Maya took a deep breath and responded in a firm voice. "I'm staying." Victoria raised her eyebrows, genuine surprise crossing her face for a brief second. Then she smiled. "So be it. Tomorrow you will understand the mistake you made." That night Maya barely slept. She knew the next day would be the hardest of her life. She knew Victoria would carry out every word of her threat. She knew she would be humiliated, exposed, destroyed in front of dozens of people. But she also knew she had proof. She had testimonies. She had photographs of the diary. And she had Mrs. Gable by her side, ready to witness everything she had seen over 15 years. The question that kept her awake wasn't whether she should face Victoria. It was how to do it in a way that Edward would finally believe, how to break years of psychological conditioning in a single night, how to make a man so manipulated see the truth that had always been before him. She got up before dawn and went to the window. The mansion was silent, but she knew that in a few hours it would transform into a battleground, a stage where two women would face each other, one fighting to keep her empire of lies, another fighting to free all the prisoners of that empire. Maya touched her hair, feeling the familiar texture of the wig. For 20 years she had lived with the constant fear that someone would find out. For 20 years she had hidden behind layers of protection, building an entire life around this secret. She had chosen professions that didn't require too much physical proximity. She had avoided intimate relationships that could expose her. She had always lived with one foot back, always calculating risks, always afraid that someone would pull her hair and reveal the truth that had defined her since childhood. But today, in a few hours, she would have to do the opposite. She would have to expose herself voluntarily. She would have to turn her greatest shame into an act of courage. She would have to reveal what she had always hidden and somehow use it not as a weakness but as a strength. She thought of all Victoria's victims, of David, whose life had been destroyed years ago, of Edward, who lived as an emotional prisoner, of Eleanor, being deliberately confused with medication, of every employee who trembled in fear working in that house. And she thought of herself, of the girl who was bullied, of the teenager who cried in hiding, of the woman who built layer upon layer of protection to never feel vulnerable again. But vulnerability, Maya realized as the sun began to rise, wasn't weakness. It was courage. It was the willingness to show oneself whole with all the flaws, all the scars, all the imperfections. And sometimes it was the only way to defeat someone who used secrets as weapons. The day of the party broke clear and sunny. The mansion buzzed with activity. Staff ran from one side to the other. The catering crew set up elaborate tables. Musicians tuned instruments. Everything was being prepared to look perfect. Victoria moved through the house in a designer dress and expensive jewelry, supervising every detail. When she crossed paths with Maya in the hallway, she smiled with false sweetness and said quietly, "Are you ready for your debut?" Maya didn't answer. She just kept working, helping with the preparations, waiting for the right moment. Edward spent the day in the office, oblivious to everything. He seemed tired, distant as always. Victoria ensured he didn't interact much with the preparations. She said she wanted to surprise him, and he, conditioned to trust her blindly, accepted without question. In the afternoon, the first guests began to arrive. Businessmen in custom Italian suits, socialites in designer dresses that had been reserved months in advance, journalists with discreet but powerful cameras, ready to capture every noteworthy moment. Everyone circulated through the gardens, illuminated by hundreds of strategically positioned lights, drinking French champagne served in crystal flutes and admiring the decoration that had transformed the mansion into a fairy tale setting, or a nightmare depending on the point of view. Superficial conversations filled the air, polite laughter, compliments to the hostess, comments on the beauty of the decor. No one there imagined they were about to witness something far beyond a simple wedding anniversary celebration. No one suspected that tonight would become unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Maya watched from afar, dressed in her simple employee uniform, contrasting completely with the luxury around her. She knew she would soon be called. She knew Victoria was just waiting for the perfect moment. The moment when everyone was gathered, when the audience was maximum, when the impact of the humiliation could be amplified to the extreme. The moment when there were enough photographers to ensure everything would be documented and spread. Because Victoria did nothing halfway, when she destroyed someone, she turned it into a spectacle, and tonight would be her masterpiece. Mrs. Gable found Maya near the kitchen and held her hand. "I'm with you," the housekeeper whispered. "No matter what happens, I will testify. I will tell the truth." Maya thanked her with tearful eyes. Having someone by her side after so much time fighting alone meant more than she could express. The party reached its peak around 9 at night. The mansion was packed. Music played softly. Animated conversations filled the air. Edward and Victoria moved among the guests, receiving congratulations and posing for photos. And then Victoria gave a discreet signal to one of the waiters. It was time. Maya was called to the main ballroom. She felt her legs shake as she walked among the well-dressed guests. Everyone looked at her with curiosity. A simple employee being summoned in the middle of an elegant party. Something was about to happen. Victoria was in the center of the room next to Edward, with a microphone in her hand. She smiled as Maya approached. A victorious smile. A smile that said the game was over. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began in a clear voice, "I would like to call your attention to something important. This woman," she pointed to Maya, "infiltrated my house weeks ago. She lied about her identity. She invented references. And she did it at the behest of my husband's family, who never accepted our marriage." Murmurs spread among the guests. Edward looked at Maya with confusion. Photographers began to record the scene. "But that isn't all," Victoria continued, savoring every word. "This woman lives a much bigger lie. Something she hides from everyone. Something that defines who she truly is." Maya felt her heart race. She knew Victoria's next move would be devastating. She knew she was seconds away from having her deepest secret exposed to hundreds of curious eyes. But then, before Victoria could continue, Maya did something that surprised everyone. She took a step forward. She snatched the microphone from Victoria's hand, and she looked at the silent crowd with eyes that, despite the visible fear, shone with determination. Because Maya had realized something fundamental. If she was going to be exposed anyway, it would be on her own terms. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not hidden behind shame, but standing tall, whole, ready to tell her truth. And at that moment, before all those strangers, Maya made the bravest decision of her life. She decided to stop hiding. "It's true," Maya began with a firm voice, holding the microphone. "I infiltrated this house. I lied about my identity. I was hired by Edward's family because they were desperate, because the man they loved had emotionally disappeared and no one understood why." The silence in the room was absolute. Every gaze was fixed on her. Victoria tried to take back the microphone, but Maya stepped away. "And yes," Maya continued, "I am hiding something. Something I have carried since I was a child. Something that shames me deeply." She took a deep breath, and before she could change her mind, she raised her hands to her hair. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Maya removed her wig with a firm movement. She let it fall to the floor, and she stood there, standing before hundreds of people, with her head completely bald, exposing the vulnerability she had hidden all her adult life. Gasps spread through the crowd. Cameras clicked, but Maya kept her head high. "I suffered an accident when I was 8 years old. I lost my hair and it never grew back. I spent my childhood being humiliated. I spent my adolescence hiding, and I spent my adult life afraid that someone would find out." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "Victoria discovered my secret, and she threatened to expose it exactly this way, to destroy me, to make me give up on revealing who she truly is." She looked directly at Victoria, whose face was pale with surprise and anger. "But I decided I'm not going to live in fear anymore. I'm not going to let shame control me anymore. And I'm not going to allow this woman to continue destroying lives." She turned to Edward, who was paralyzed, looking between Maya and Victoria with total confusion. "Edward, you need to know the truth. Your wife is not who you think she is, and I have proof." She gave a signal. Mrs. Gable emerged from the crowd, holding a tablet. Maya connected the device to a projector that was prepared to show photos of the party. But instead of images of the celebration, pages from Victoria's diary began to appear. The first image showed Victoria's elegant handwriting describing Edward as a target. Everyone has a weak point. Edward is emotionally fragile after the failure of the Horizon project. Perfect. Edward read the words projected on the wall. His face gradually lost all color. More images appeared. Pages and pages documenting systematic manipulation. How Victoria had deliberately isolated Edward. How she had poisoned his relations with his family. How she had created a calculated emotional dependency. "This isn't real," Victoria said, finally finding her voice. "These are forgeries. This woman is inventing all of this because she was hired to destroy our marriage." But Maya was prepared. Mrs. Gable began to speak, her voice trembling but determined. "I've worked in this house for 15 years. I saw everything. The cruelty, the humiliations, the staff fired without reason, the way she turns fear into power." She looked at Victoria with decades of contained rage. "You made me cry every day. You made me believe I was incompetent, unworthy, disposable. But I saw who you really are." Other voices joined in. Lillian, the former governess, was among the guests. She had been invited purposely by Maya. She stood up and began to tell her story, how Victoria had psychologically tortured her years ago, how she had created impossible situations just to have an excuse to punish. And then, someone appeared, who made the entire room fall into total silence. David, Edward's cousin, the man Victoria had destroyed years earlier. Maya had found David through the diary records. She had contacted him, told him everything. And he, after years of trying to understand why his life had collapsed, finally had answers, and he was ready to testify. "I met Victoria 6 years ago," David began with a choked voice. "She used another name, another last name. She appeared in my life when I was vulnerable. She won my trust. And then systematically she destroyed my marriage, my business, my reputation. I never understood how everything went so wrong so fast. Until today, until seeing these pages from her diary, until realizing that every disaster, every bad coincidence, every disastrous decision I made was carefully orchestrated." Edward looked at Victoria with eyes that finally saw the truth, and for the first time in 4 long years, he truly saw her, without the filters of carefully constructed manipulation, without the emotional conditioning she had planted day after day, without the fog of dependency that blinded him. He just saw who she was, a predator, a liar, someone who had turned his love into a trap and his trust into a prison. "Victoria," he said with a broken voice, "tell me this isn't true, please." Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Because there was no excuse, there was no explanation that could erase the evidence projected on the wall. The pages of her own diary, the testimonies of multiple victims, the meticulous documentation of years of psychological predation. For the first time since Maya had met her, Victoria looked small, exposed, vulnerable. "You don't understand," she finally said in a low voice. "All of you with your perfect lives, your loving families, your easy connections. I needed to prove I was better, that I could control, that I could win. By destroying other people." Edward's voice was heavy with pain. "That made you feel better, isolating me from my family, making me believe I was alone. It was all just a game to you?" "It wasn't a game," Victoria responded, and for the first time there was genuine emotion in her voice. "It was survival. It was power. It was the only thing that made me feel like I mattered." Edward shook his head slowly. Then he stepped away from her, physically, emotionally. He completely broke the connection she had built with such care over 4 years. "Get out of my house," he said in a firm voice. "Now." The police were called, not because there was an evident crime, but to ensure Victoria left without causing more damage. She was escorted out of the mansion, with all the guests watching in silence. The woman who entered that party as a powerful hostess left as a defeated figure, exposed, stripped of all the masks she wore. When the doors closed behind her, it was as if the entire mansion could breathe for the first time in years. Edward searched for Maya among the crowd. She was still there, without the wig, vulnerable but standing tall. "Thank you," he said simply. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything my blindness allowed to happen in this house." Maya nodded. She didn't need more words. She saw in his eyes that the man his family had described was slowly returning. It would still take time. He would still need support. But for the first time in years, Edward was free. The guests began to disperse, some shocked, some moved, some just anxious to spread the story they had witnessed. But Maya knew it didn't matter. The truth was exposed. Victoria could no longer hunt in silence. Mrs. Gable approached Maya and hugged her. "Thank you," the housekeeper whispered. "Thank you for having the courage when none of us did." In the days that followed, much changed in the Greenwich mansion. Edward reconnected with his family. He called Richard and other old friends, he apologized, he explained, and slowly he began to rebuild the bridges Victoria had burned. Eleanor, with her medication dosage corrected by real doctors, gradually regained her lucidity. It was she who, one afternoon, called Maya for a talk. "You turned your greatest vulnerability into strength," the lady said with sparkling eyes. "That is rare. That is powerful. Never forget what you did here." Maya visited the mansion a few weeks later, no longer as an employee, but as a guest. She still wore a wig in her daily life. She still felt that sting of shame when she thought about her condition, but something had fundamentally changed inside her. She had discovered that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to act despite it. It was the choice to protect others, even when it meant exposing yourself. It was understanding that vulnerability, when used consciously, could be the most powerful weapon against those who tried to control you. Edward received her in the living room. He looked different. His shoulders were no longer hunched. His eyes had shine again. He was rediscovering who he was before Victoria entered his life. "I heard Victoria was seen in another town," he commented, trying to start over with another identity. Maya nodded. She had heard the same. Women like Victoria rarely changed. But at least now there was a record. There were testimonies. There was a documented pattern that could alert future victims. "And you?" Edward asked. "How are you?" Maya thought for a moment. "I'm learning," she responded honestly. "Learning that I don't need to carry shame for what I can't control. Learning that the people who matter won't judge me for my vulnerabilities. Learning that sometimes the only way to be free is to stop hiding." Edward smiled. A genuine smile. "It seems we are both learning to live again." Maya left the mansion that afternoon, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of someone who has solved all their problems, but the peace of someone who faced their greatest fears and survived. She knew there would still be difficult days. There would still be moments of insecurity. She would still carry the scars of the accident and the trauma that shaped her life. But she also knew she was stronger than she imagined, that she had courage when the situation demanded it, that she could choose how her story would be told. And as she walked through the streets, feeling the afternoon sun on her face, Maya thought of all the people still living trapped in invisible webs, of all those who carried heavy secrets, of all those who hid for fear of judgment. And she made a silent promise that she would use her experience to help others, that she wouldn't allow her story to end just as survival, that she would turn it into something greater. Because sometimes, Maya thought, the most important battles aren't those we fight for others. They are those we fight for ourselves, against our own fears, against our own shame, against the inner voices that tell us we aren't enough. And when we win those battles, when we decide to stop hiding and start living fully, we pave the way for others to do the same. The mansion in Greenwich continued to exist, but it was no longer a prison. It was just a house, where people lived, worked, and for the first time in a long time breathed freely. And Maya, the woman who entered that house disguised as a cleaning lady, left as the person who freed not only the others, but mainly herself. Because in the end, the greatest victory wasn't defeating Victoria. It was defeating the fear that controlled her. It was choosing truth over hiding. It was deciding that her story deserved to be told on her own terms. And that perhaps is the most important lesson of all, that no matter how deep our secrets, how heavy our shames, how great our fears, there is always a choice. There is always courage waiting to be discovered. There is always strength hidden in places we consider weak. Maya looked back one last time, seeing the mansion recede in the distance, and she smiled, because she knew that house, that place that represented so much fear and suffering, had also become the place where she found something precious. She found herself, whole, vulnerable, brave, free. And that, in the end, was worth every moment of terror, every second of exposure, every racing heartbeat during that unforgettable night. Because freedom, Maya discovered, wasn't living without fear, it was living despite it, and that was a lesson she would carry with her forever. Dear listeners, we hope that Maya's story and her courage